Do you trust the government? Do you trust your politicians? That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt discussion. And I'm Cheryl Chumley, your host of Bold and Blunt, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And my guest today, Congressman Doug Collins from Georgia, has a new book that's coming out. It's on pre-order now on Amazon, The Cloak and the Calendar, and it's all about the behind-scenes look at discussions on Capitol Hill during, get this, Russia collusion. Congressman Collins has penned a book about behind-scenes discussions. He's peeling back the cloak of Capitol Hill and giving us all a glimpse about what took place during the 3+ years of allegations and accusations and spins and lies and misdirects and all that were thrown at then President Donald Trump. It's a book you're not going to want to miss, and seriously, this is a discussion you're not going to want to miss either. So stay tuned on Bold and Blunt for that interview with Congressman Collins. And in the meanwhile, I want to look at trust in politicians. We're going to look at some of the surveys, some of the polls, and I'm going to ask you, if you trust your government official, why? For goodness sake, why? Before I get into that, though, I want to give a special heads up for listeners of Bold and Blunt podcast in particular, and that is a special deal the Washington Times is offering. You can go to washingtontimes.com/Cheryl, type in some information, and you can have a 50% off discount to the Washington Times digital platform. That's commentaries, that's great news and investigative reports, analysis, and all the podcasts like this one, like Bold and Blunt. And if you're already a subscriber, look, thank you. Thank you so much for supporting the staff of the Washington Times, because you know the economy under Joe Biden is tanking, and so that includes news services as well. And the Washington Times really works hard to bring you guys the truths that you need to fight the mainstream media. So if you are a subscriber, special thank you from me to you. And if you're not a subscriber, look, I'm just going to ask you, why not? Come on aboard, subscribe, check out all the Washington Times has to offer, and arm yourself with the truths that you need to fight these liars out there, right? It's biblical. Arm yourself with the spiritual weaponry you need, and part of that is truth, right? Part of that is truth, and you can get that from the Washington Times. So that's the pitch. That's my special ask. And that is my special thank you to all you would-be subscribers who are on your way right now to your computer or to your cell phone to type in the info and subscribe. WashingtonTimes.com/Cheryl. Do you trust your politicians? I don't think a lot of you do. 538, right? That's the polling site. March 2020 wrote this. The headline is, Americans don't trust the people in charge of the coronavirus fight. That's actually a healthy perspective. This from Pew Research, September 2020. A headline, Americans' views of government, low trust, but some positive performance ratings. Majorities in both parties say federal government should play a major role on public health, economy, many other areas. Well, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at what Pew found just about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, about what Americans think of their duly elected public servants. Because let's remember, we are the employers and the public servants are just that. The employees, the public servants, they're there to serve. They're not there to rule. A lot of politicians these days have it flipped. They think they're in office to tell you what to do. Thus, the years plus worth of the coronavirus clampdown. So we'll get to that poll in a minute. But in general, politicians are employees of the people, right? That is the rightful view of government. Let's look at this poll. 72% of Americans think that the U.S. government handles terrorism well, very good or somewhat good. 62% of Americans think that the U.S. government handles response to natural disasters, either very well or somewhat well, where the American government is failing its people, according to those polled by Pew. Surprise, surprise, managing the U.S. immigration system. The government gets poor marks for that. Well, no, duh. All they do is open the borders. That's the Democrat way, right? Okay, so 64% think the U.S. government does either a very bad or somewhat bad job at managing the U.S. immigration system. So that includes Democrats and Republicans, right? I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Republicans think the government does a poor job of managing U.S. borders, because when Democrats are in charge, they open the borders wide. So in essence, they don't manage. And conversely, I think Democrats would have answered this question, that the American government does a poor job managing the borders when Republicans are in office and they try and actually control who comes in the borders. Imagine that, controlling who comes in your country. Law, order, wow. What a concept. Democrats don't like that. So, of course, when Donald Trump was in the White House, they hated how the border was being managed. If you look at the totals of this poll, I'm not going to go through every category, because it talks about, it gives ratings based on ensuring safe food and medicine, responding to natural disasters, ensuring safe food and medicine, strengthening the economy, infrastructure, healthcare. It goes through all that. But the takeaway here is just 20% of U.S. adults say, and I'm quoting Pew Research here, 20% of U.S. adults say they trust the government in Washington to do the right thing just about always or most of the time. Look, the headline here is that, oh my goodness, only 20% of Americans believe that their politicians are doing the right thing or trying to do the right thing most of the time. But the real takeaway here is, why do 20% of Americans believe that their politicians are doing the right thing most of the time? It should only be maybe 1%, right? Look at what founding fathers said about the government, about people in power. John Adams, and just as a heads up, usually when I quote founding fathers, I search to find that the quotes are actually truthful quotes from the source. For instance, just because it's on a web page as being quoted by a founding fathers doesn't necessarily mean that the founding fathers said that. There are a lot of quotes floating out there attributed to the founding fathers, commonly cited as coming from the founding fathers. When you really look at the history of it and you do your research, you find out, wow, that founding father didn't say that at all. So this quote I'm about to read from John Adams, I have not independently verified it, but I'm going to read it anyhow because it's the spirit. It's the spirit that still holds true. John Adams: there is danger from all men. The only maxim of a free government ought to be to trust no man living with power to endanger the public liberty. In other words, to paraphrase, don't trust your politicians. Okay? Because how many times do we vote for somebody, and we vote for somebody based on the promises they made on the campaign trail, based on the promises they made to you personally as you stood up in the local town hall session that this then candidate politician held for you, and you had your issue addressed, and boy, the guy seemed really genuine, or the lady seemed oh so sincere, only to find out a couple years later, post-election, that they voted completely opposite what they promised, right? Happens all the time. So what John Adams, allegedly John Adams, is saying here, there's danger in trusting people in power. And let me underscore that by jumping now to this 538 poll from, once again, March 2020. The headline: Americans don't trust the people in charge of the coronavirus fight. No, duh. You know why? This was over a year ago, but the lack of trust, the distrust, has only grown deeper. And the reason why is because those in charge of the coronavirus have done nothing but issue conflicting information that is masked or cloaked as truthful science, which is then twisted and turned as the breeze blows by whatever medical bureaucrat is standing in front of the media podium that day. Anthony Fauci. All you have to do is Google Anthony Fauci through the months, right? Google Anthony Fauci February 2020. Google Anthony Fauci March 2020. Google Anthony Fauci April 2020. I think you see where I'm going with this, right? Just keep Googling over the months of the coronavirus and look at how his own statements, advisements, recommendations, bits of guidance have changed. And if you're a good sheep, if you're a good obedient sheep, you're going to look at the changing, conflicting advisements and express in outrage to yourself and to whomever is in your sphere of influence that, well, the only reason Anthony Fauci's advisements have changed is because the science has changed and the coronavirus has changed. Well, okay, but let's reel back to the basic founding of America and realize that founding fathers never put Anthony Fauci or any medical or health bureaucrat in charge of deciding personal health decisions, right? Because with the coronavirus, let's face facts here. What it comes down to is individual medical decision. If you want to wear a face mask, that's your individual medical decision. If you want to get a vaccine, that's your individual medical decision. If you want to wear 2 face masks, because as Anthony Fauci at one point during the ever-changing science said, if 1 face mask are good, if 1 face mask is good, then 2 are better. It's only common sense. You remember when he said that? It's common sense. It's common sense. Which then leads to the question, well, if 2 face masks are better, then why not 3, 4, 5? This is what it comes down to. Individual choice, individual health decisions. And we have forgotten that. And instead, we've put our trust in the coronavirus politicians, the coronavirus bureaucrats, the medical experts who can't even agree on their medical expertise. They can't even agree on their own so-called science. I mean, the word science is in permanent air quotes in my mind because of the abuse of the word science over the last year and a half of the coronavirus. Everything's science, which means anything is science. And boy, have the politicians exploited that. And so has Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci has been one of the greatest deceivers of the coronavirus movement because he has come forward and issued pronouncement after pronouncement on the so-called science, all the while insisting that he has nothing to do with policy and is only issuing scientific facts and finding, all the while sliding policy into America's politics. He does it with his hands in the air, as if he don't care. I'm not a politician, I'm just a scientist. But if I were a politician, I would have everybody wearing face masks all the time, indoors and out, from the age 2 on up. That's how he does it. He expresses surprise that anybody would dare ask him a political question because after all, he's just a scientist. And yet at the same time, he can't help but then go forward and say what he would do, what the best medical practice would be. In other words, if you're a politician and you're not listening to Anthony Fauci's best medical practice and taking those medical advisements and putting them into political play, then you are risking the health of Americans. You are endangering Americans, and you are contributing to the death toll of the coronavirus. That's how Anthony Fauci has worked. And he's not alone. He's not alone, right? The politicians have taken what he said and they've shoved it down Americans' throats. Or more to truth, they've slapped it across America's faces. They've slapped face masks on people as they walk down the street 6 feet apart, or go on the beaches, or travel in an airplane. How many times have you seen people driving alone in their cars down a road wearing face masks over their face? That's the science. That's the science we've become. March 2020, 5:38. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention wants you to stay home if you're sick, stop buying face masks if you're healthy, and, for God's sake, wash your hands. That was back then. Now the CDC says you don't have to wear face masks if you're vaccinated, but Anthony Fauci says you do, and the American Academy of Pediatrics says you do. So, once again, science is in conflict, and when schools reopen, mark these words, most kids in America in public school systems will be wearing face masks on their buses at the bus stop during the school day, even though they take them off to eat, even though they sit next to each other and take them off to eat. Apparently the coronavirus knows to not drift through the air at that particular moment. The coronavirus knows when they're eating, and it knows not to drift into the air. Good thing on that. But once they're done eating, if they don't put the face masks back over their mouths and noses, then the coronavirus is a danger again. And trust in politicians and the government they represent, I'm quoting from 538 again, turns out to be a pretty important part of effectively responding to an epidemic. Because if Americans are told one thing one day by one individual and told another thing another day by that same individual, and then told another thing yet another day by, again, that same individual, not only does it become confusing and frustrating, but it becomes ridiculous. Why would American citizens just blindly follow somebody who is leading them in circles? This is the state of science in America right now. And this is the state of Americans' trust in their politicians. This isn't a bad thing. As John Adams says, there is danger from all men. The only maxim of a free government ought to be to trust no man living with power to endanger the public liberty. And who held the power under then President Donald Trump? Who held the behind-scenes power that was constantly throwing darts at the Donald Trump White House? Remember the deep state? The deep state. We heard quite a bit about it. And my guest today, Congressman Doug Collins, has written a book that should shed some light for people who pick up this book, which is due out in November. For people who pick up a copy of The Clock and the Calendar, it should shed some light on some of the deep state maneuverings, some of the Democrats' ducks and dodges with truths, and actually some of the Democrats who maybe were ashamed of how their own party's leadership were handling the bogus Russia collusion and the impeachment and so forth. So let's get into this discussion with Congressman Collins. Thank you so much for being here on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's going to be good.
So, you know what's going to be good is this book. This book you have coming out, The Clock and the Calendar. This is going to be one of the most important books of the year. I'm sure of it. It's not coming out until November, but it's already #1 bestseller, and it is a behind-scenes look at the Trump impeachment. Tell people what you found out in this book.
Well, what I wanted to do is present the case, because from 2017, when the president first came in, I was a member of the leadership in the House and in the conference, and then by the second last 2 years president, I was the ranking member of Judiciary. And all that I saw from the Democrats was just this obsession because he won the election. They were willing to do anything they could to get at him. So what I wanted to do when I sat down to write this book was not just give a historical account. I wanted to take people sort of into the room of what I experienced dealing with Democrats who decided that rules didn't matter, procedure didn't matter. All that mattered was getting at Donald Trump. And so you're going to be able to, as you read this book, you'll be able to walk with me through the Mueller investigation, through the issues we had with the Russia investigation, but also then into the impeachment. And as I said in the cover of the book that you'll see, it's I believe that the impeachment of Donald Trump, especially in 2019, it didn't begin with a phone call with the Ukrainian president. It began on the night in November of 2016 when he beat Hillary Clinton, and the Democrats were said, we're just not going to let that stand. So for me, it gives you a behind-the-scenes look at the out of control nature at times of the Democrats' obsession with getting Donald Trump.
You know, there are a lot of us out there who believe similarly that the takedown of Donald Trump began as soon as he had the audacity to win. But we're Trump supporters. So is there any evidence that you found, anything that you saw behind scenes that could give wings to this whole Russia collusion?
Well, we can, and I think this is why I wrote the book differently. And I wrote it not, like I said, a lot of books have been out there talking about it, and they talk about it from, here's what we saw here. What I was able to do, what I wanted to do in this book was simply walk you through, and I'll show you where the Democrats, through our work with Jerry Nadler's office, how the moment, our first meeting, and one of the first meetings we had was, it was a discussion on investigating the president. At the time, Whitaker was still the acting AG. Barr had just been named, and all they were concerned about was protecting the Mueller investigation, trying to make a political show out of Whitaker and others, because what they knew they had to do, and then what I lay out in the book as we go through here, is they had to take away what they felt like was any argument against Mueller or the others, that it was definitely what was going to take down Donald Trump. Well, the problem was it didn't. And when that unraveled and my committee and us on the Judiciary Committee and the minority started, we were able to go on the offensive. That's when it all unraveled, and they were willing to do most anything. So I think when you read this book, you're going to see it from a perspective of just history of saying, look, here's the things that the Democrats did. Here's what they did to change the rules. Here's how they did to change the processes. And I think what you're going to see is now a really, frankly, like I said, a first-hand account of the Democrats trying to take down Donald Trump.
So in your first-hand account, did you come across any Democrats at all who were trustworthy? Any Democrats that appeared sane behind the scenes?
I did, and I talked about that a little bit in the book. Of course, they would come up to me. The thing that they were most surprised by, and I tried to lay this out a little bit, being ranking member with Jerry Nadler was always a challenge, in that and his committee was just so bad. But I would have Democrats who I had worked with before on the floor come up and say, what's going on in your committee, and what's going on, why is this happening? And it really, what happened, and I try to paint this in an easy to understand picture as I can, is the Judiciary Committee was actually an embarrassment to a lot of Democrats. They couldn't come out and say that. But by the time the impeachment process began after the Ukrainian call, Adam Schiff, the reason Adam Schiff actually rose to prominence was because the Judiciary Committee in the first half of 2019 had so badly made a sideshow of this attack on Donald Trump.
What is Adam Schiff like in person? Is he someone that Republicans can ever work with?
No, and I say that as someone who did work a lot across the aisle and got a lot done. I was the author of the First Step Act, the President's criminal justice reform. We did a lot of things that were bipartisan. Adam Schiff has never shown, frankly, any indication of, especially when it comes to Donald Trump, wanting to do anything bipartisanly. Devin Nunes, a good friend, Chairman Nunes, and I, had dealt with. He'd had to deal with him up close. I deal with Schiff's what I believe just outright treachery in the impeachment hearings in the book. When he wouldn't even tell the truth, and I think that's the part of it. It disappointed me. I write about it a little bit. That the media would not even hold him accountable, even when after the Washington Post, found him guilty of lying. It was still anything he said goes. So Adam Schiff was a driver, but I lay out that dynamic in the book, and you'll see that as we go through the book.
You raised the issue, the very next issue that I wanted to broach with you, and that is, to what extent did the media fuel this? Was it more the Democrats? Was it more the media, or a combination?
It was both. And I think, look, And one of the things that's been talked about, I mentioned in the book, but just in general, when you deal with Donald Trump, you have to understand that the media did not know how to deal with someone who at one time they lauded because of his overt personality and willingness to talk straight. But when it came to one of their sacred institutions, remember, liberals hold government in very high esteem. Conservatives hold government in the proper place of constitutional role. They hold it in a place of actually, controlling and changing, their, more of a collectivist vision. So when Donald Trump came in and started saying, look, we're going to, shrink government, we're going to shrink regulations, we're going to do these things, they began to be panicked. So you would see the change in the media. And I mentioned this in one part of the book. I'd had reporters that I had dealt with when the Democrats were not in power, but we were in control of all three, who were, they would talk to us, they were willing to, write stories, but immediately when the Democrats took power, they wouldn't even, those same reporters who would once try to, report, he quit even reaching out, and their articles and everything else became very, very much slanted toward what we felt like was the Democratic position, the Democratic talking point.
Do you address this in your book? And if not, maybe you could address it here. But what about the Republicans who got on board with the whole idea of impeachment, both over the last couple years and currently, that have dug down in opposition to Donald Trump?
In the first impeachment, that from a member perspective, and again, I tried to write this from a member, taking the average person who has never even been to Washington, or if they have been familiar, say this is what it's like for a member and what my experiences were. What we started seeing, though, again, I think it was very similar to the, I quote, Republicans that you name, I have trouble with that term, who began to attack Donald Trump even, from the moment he was president, because they didn't like him. What was interesting to me is you can have policy difference, but I never saw the real policy different problem. I started seeing people who had, quote, been Republicans all their life say that they didn't like Donald Trump, and it became more of a, he doesn't do things the way I like it. I'm a former Baptist minister. I pastored for 11 years. I'm still a chaplain in the Air Force, and there's one thing that you knew was always a situation and change, and that was when somebody would come to you at the church or wherever and say, we've never done it that way before. And I think there's a lot of old Republicans who were just, fine to go along and get along. And Donald Trump wasn't about going along and getting along, and they may not like his style, but they made a choice to say, we don't like him, and thus we'll oppose him.
You're absolutely right. There were a lot of people who didn't like Donald Trump just because he did things differently, and he didn't shy from the battle. But aren't we at the point in our nation right now where Americans desperately needed somebody like Donald Trump to swing the pendulum back from the Barack Obama days?
Yeah, I believe so. I think, and the things that are going to be historically written, and I may even tackle this challenge later on, the things that are in the Trump administration that are not, being focused on now because of all the other issues that are out there and the dislike among the media and others of the former president, is the fact that he did actually fundamentally change some of the way that government operated. And when I think about this, I think about the regulatory behemoth that is the federal government, but that during Donald Trump's administration became much more tame and did what it was supposed to do, and that is regulate where it's supposed to and stay out of where it shouldn't be. Those are the kind of things I think historically people will look back on, lack of passion, if you would, and look back on and say, this Trump presidency was actually pretty amazing in a lot of different ways that actually affected people's lives. This is the first president, and I go back to criminal justice reform. He took on something that Republicans, had not wanted to do, Democrats didn't want to touch, and actually has begun to change people's lives, and especially those minority, disadvantaged communities in our criminal justice system. They have new hope because of Donald Trump.
Yep.
He never got the credit for that. And I think in history, in hindsight, he will. Unfortunately, the passion right now doesn't do it.
Absolutely. And I know time's tight for you, but I just want to get this last question out there. In your book, The Clock and the Calendar, it's coming out at a time where Donald Trump is going to have to announce a decision or make a decision about whether he's going to seek re-election or not. Was that in your mind when you were writing this book, when you were timing the release of this book with your publisher at that time?
Not really, because he was already making those decisions. What we wanted to do, though, and we went ahead and get this out because I was seeing too many reporters, and there's going to be a lot more reporter books coming out. There's going to be others, and I knew that they were writing books, and I wanted to give an impression, number one, from a Republican, someone who actually had dealt with the president, who supported the president, who had worked, but was also someone who could give a firsthand look at what happened and push back against the Swalwells and the Raskins and the Nadlers and the Pelosi's and the Schiffs of the world, and say, no, let's talk about this honestly. And I think that's what I attempted to do in the book. I think it'll give a good platform for people to discuss, what really happened, and if the president chooses to run again, it'll hopefully give a different perspective.
Well, I know I can't wait to read it. Anything that gives a behind-scenes look at the mysteries in Congress is something that I think Americans should latch a hold of and read. So, Congressman Doug Collins, author of The Clock and the Calendar, coming out in November. People can pre-order it on Amazon, right?
Amazon Books, Barnes & Noble, Booksman, anywhere they can get their pre-order.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, and thank you for your service to the country.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for having me on. Take care.
God bless. Boy, this is going to be a good book, isn't it? November is when it comes out. Go to Amazon, pre-order it now, and prepare to have the curtain peeled back. Anything that gives you a behind-scenes look at what takes place in Congress is a must-read on my list. It helps with the transparency, and that helps with the trust in government. Thanks for listening. Tune in next time, and in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.